Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Joel Erway joining us. Joel, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Michael. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into this with you here today. For those who don't know you, Joel, just take a moment and explain what you do.
Cool. So I run a company called The Webinar Agency, and I also have a podcast, two podcasts called Sold with Webinars, go figure, and Experts Unleashed. Primarily, I work with coaches, consultants, solopreneurs to help them build high-converting sales webinars, sales presentations. So we do that to either sell their course, or we also do high-end lead generation webinars where they generate high-ticket sales appointments from those webinars. So I've been doing this for about 3.5 to 4 years and loving life.
Good stuff. So you started your career as an engineer. Is that right?
I did. Back in the day, way back in the day. I graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology with a degree in mechanical engineering technology in 2009. I lasted about 8 months before I had to make a pivot. So I did start out in the engineering field, yes.
Let's kind of explore that a little bit. I mean, how do you go from being an engineer to getting into webinars?
Yeah, so after about 8 months of working as a mechanical engineer, I was working on commercial buildings, designing their heating and cooling systems. I was stuck behind a desk and I was drawing CAD layouts. So computer-aided design, for anyone who doesn't know what CAD is. And it was just really boring. I knew that I had an outgoing personality, and why I decided to do engineering in school, I'm not entirely sure. But within 8 months, I was looking for a new gig. So we had these sales reps that would come in every month or so, and they would do these lunch and learn presentations to help pitch their products. They wanted us to design buildings around their commercial heating and cooling products. Mm-hmm. So while I was looking for a new gig, I came across this job opening for one of these firms, the sales rep firm, and it was for a sales engineering role. And so I was really thinking about okay, what am I going to be doing over the course of my life? Do I really want to stay in this design role where I'm sitting behind a computer desk and I'm sure I can eventually get to 6 figures a year? But I'm 22 at the time. I was 22 years old, and I knew that I could take a risk. And so I interviewed for this job. I ended up getting the job offer. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to take a stab at this. They wanted me to build a brand new territory, so I had no experience in sales. But it ended up being a very difficult role, but it was one of the best decisions that I had made because it opened my eyes to the world of sales presentations. And so I'm telling the kind of abridged version of this just to save the time. I was working in a territory in Buffalo, New York. Buffalo was my sales territory, and so we didn't have any presence there. The way that we would generate leads and we would generate business is primarily we would have our manufacturers that we represented. We would bring them through to all of our customers, and these manufacturers would give a presentation. And at the end, hopefully, our customers would have a project for us to work on. I say hopefully because it never happened. Very rarely happened that would turn into any work. So we were doing this for about 2 or 3 years, and I was a 100% commission-only salesperson, which meant I ate what I killed. So if I didn't make any sales, I didn't make any money. Mm-hmm. So 2 or 3 years of doing this and realizing that we had very, very slow growth, and I could clearly identify that these sales presentations were completely ineffective, I decided to learn how to give them on my own because I wasn't giving the presentations at the time. I would bring somebody else in and they would give the presentation. And I very quickly realized after reading a few books on sales presentations that engineers giving presentations to engineers is some of the most brutal things that you can sit through. And even though you would think that that engineers would want to learn from other engineers, every time that we would give one of these presentations, my manufacturer, who was an engineer, would give a presentation. I'd look out in the audience and I'd see people just falling asleep. Literally, they'd be falling asleep. And you can't buy anything if you're not paying attention, if you can't stay awake. So I realized that I needed to change the presentations completely. And so after a few months of prepping and reading and doing some research on how to give an effective sales presentation, I started to see some trends as to what all these different books were talking about. So I took it into my own hands and I started giving my own presentations on certain products that I enjoyed. And from the very first presentation that I gave, I threw all of the other stuff out the window. I created my own slide decks. I created my own presentations. and the results were astounding. The first time I gave a presentation, it set off a spiral of new business that we had booked over the course of the next year and a half that generated probably between $1 and $3 million in revenue. Now, to give you some perspective of how much that meant for our territory, I think our best year to date was like $500,000 or $800,000 in sales.
This was significant growth above the baseline.
It was tremendous growth for just my tiny territory. And
what was the product that you initially created that presentation for? Do you remember?
Yeah, the first product that I created the presentation for was for, I don't want to get super technical, but it was for air conditioners, high-end air conditioners. And so LG Electronics, LG, like
sure,
your television, same company, they created this product called a variable refrigerant volume system, or variable refrigerant flow technology, which basically meant it was highly efficient and our customers were able to control their own zones. But it was very, very technical and it was very, very expensive. But I knew that there was a big opportunity and our company was making a big push to sell that. So that was my first presentation that I put together.
Got it. So that sounds like kind of opened your eyes to the possibility of being able to sell effectively from a presentation. Let's fast forward. So you took that experience, and then how did you transition from that first win to deciding, okay, I'm going to go out on my own and build a webinar focused agency?
Yeah. So I'd never actually put two and two together. So when I ended up leaving the company, I had entrepreneurial passions and I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to try, and my first venture was to build a course to sell to other engineers. And it was a career development course. So I put together a course. I was going to sell it for, I don't know, $500, and it failed miserably. I had learned the start of the art of the sales presentation, the webinar, learned from a couple of marketing mentors, like, yeah, you need to sell this with a webinar. So go get it. I ran a couple of webinars and I was making sales. I was very green at the time and I thought that I was doing poorly. I wish somebody had kind of told me that you are really close to being successful and just stick with it, because knowing what I know now, I realized I was right there. I just wasn't putting enough money into my advertising to actually make it work. Anyway, so I ran out of money and I called up my coach at the current time. And I actually asked him for a job. I'm like, hey man, I love your program and I have nothing against it. I just ran out of cash. Do you have any openings to sell your coaching program? Like, I can vouch for you as a testimonial. I love your stuff. And he's like, well, all of our leads are handled right now, but what you should do is you should reach out to this other guy who's in the program. His name is Jason. Reach out to him because he's looking for a phone salesperson. And that's what I was trying to do. So I reached out to Jason. Jason wanted someone to follow up on the phone with all of his webinar leads of people who didn't buy his program.
Right.
And so he said, well, why don't you take a look at the webinar first so you know what you're selling? And I need you to call this list of leads. So I did. And when I looked at his webinar, I immediately saw an opportunity for the webinar to be improved. I just could see that it was a terrible webinar. And so I asked him if I could take a stab at the webinar before I called the leads. And he said, absolutely. I hate doing webinars. I just know that I need to do them.
Right.
So fast forward 2 weeks, I worked on his presentation and I actually pitched the webinar for him. He was making, I don't know, I'd say $1,000 every time that he ran the webinar. And he was essentially breaking even with his ad spend. That first time that I ran the webinar, we did 14 sales of $1,000 program. So we increased his sales by 14-fold. So he made 14 grand that week, and the rest is history. I mean, he was just blown away. He had no idea that we could even hit those numbers. And
right. So from there you decide, okay, I better just start doing this for others.
Yeah. I mean, so like word started to spread and people started to hear that I was pretty good at webinars. And I'm like, well, there's clearly money in here. Mm-hmm. I do not want to be doing phone sales. I'm not a phone sales person. I was really just hustling at that point. And so I saw this as a big opportunity and I seized it. So I started writing webinars for other clients. I started pitching them for other clients. I don't do the pitching anymore. That was really just the first couple, but I realized that my value add is in the marketplace.
Yeah.
I have a knack for being able to communicate messages effectively and particularly doing it extremely well on webinars.
So I love how focused your specialization is. Even as you were seeing that you have this expertise in this area and just were creating results for others, did you have any concerns of or fears of going so narrow, just in terms of positioning yourself as the webinar guy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I shouldn't say I still have fears, but I should say I still have the shiny object syndrome of wanting to go a little bit more wide, but we have been able to do very, very well the past few years. But just kind of going down the webinar niche, I didn't really know how big that market was. And I think that when you do get that focused, it's a good thing. And it also opens up this other, for me, it was this idea of self-doubt. Like, am I making the right decision? Should I really go this focused? So far, it's worked out very, very well. We're a relatively small agency, and I've done that by design. We did try to grow it a few months ago. I just didn't like it. So we kept it small.
Yeah.
We have more than enough leads and work to keep us busy, and it's worked out very well.
So how do you get over that self-doubt when you have like the shiny object syndrome creeping in, or you say to yourself, yeah, maybe we could do other things, or when it happened in the past? What's allowed you to stay very, very focused on your core area of expertise?
It's a great question. And I wish that I had some sort of philosophical answer to give you and be like, oh, I did this, and this is what helped me keep focus. Honestly, just the clients kept me focused, like making sure that I always had work. And what really helped move the needle for me and kept me aligned with what I wanted to do. In the beginning of 2017 now, I had the opportunity to start a podcast. And I'm not a big podcast listener, to be honest. I don't listen to many podcasts. I'm usually home. I've cut down on my traveling since my son was born. And so I don't listen to podcasts all that much, but I kept hearing like, hey, you should start a podcast. You should start a podcast. And so I did. And I'm like, well, I'm going to start one on webinars. It doesn't seem like there's many out there on webinars. There were some that were started and they've since gone defunct. But that helped me really stay focused. And to be quite honest, going that niche helped generate a ton of high quality leads for our business. So I kept going deep. I was running a bunch of Facebook ads and I had my own funnels that was working. But honestly, like the podcast has been the single greatest thing that kept me focused on sticking with webinars. I would say that I picked that medium and that helped me maintain that focus.
Yeah, no, I think it's great advice and a really important perspective. You know, a lot of clients that we work with face those challenges, even when they've been consulting for quite a number of years. It's always about figuring out how do you position yourself in a way where you can really have a competitive advantage and where you're able to have a very strong core area of expertise and not allow it to get diluted for the benefits of, as you mentioned, lead generation and messaging and just also kind of mental capacity and the focus. I appreciate that you're sharing that. I think a lot of us see, Joel, you know, we see webinars for courses, we see webinars for coaching programs. I mean, webinars are used in many different ways these days. But what about using webinars to get into and land corporate clients, larger, more established organizations, whether it's government, nonprofit, or even Fortune 500 companies? What's your experience? What's your opinion and perspective on people using webinars to land those larger, more established clients?
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early-stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early-stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months. So don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
So mostly we've focused on smaller businesses. And so, well, we don't really have much experience with the corporate world. And so I don't know if I'd be the right person to answer that. I mean, I can say, I get this question a lot is, oh, I don't think that my target audience is going to be watching a webinar. And when they really say that, those are the people who are going after your C-level executives. You're the people who, quote unquote, don't have enough time.
Right.
And so what a webinar can do is, well, number one, we've proven that that is false. If the topic is relevant and it is interesting, we have seen all sorts of people register and watch a webinar. Like when I say all sorts of different types of people, I mean, we're talking 8-figure business owners, 9-figure business owners. They will sign up and they will watch a webinar at some point. Maybe they're just skimming through it, but if the topic is relevant, we have seen them show up. So it will help accelerate the education process of who you are, what it is that you do for people, and how do you provide a solution to whatever it is that their problem is. And so does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think that provides some context for people. And I'd really appreciate that you're just being very transparent, in the areas where you don't have expertise and experience and those where you do. But it sounds like for many people that webinars can still be used to connect with, as you said, owners of 8, even 9-figure businesses in some cases. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see, Joel, people making when it comes to webinars? What are some of the big kind of glaring problems or mistakes that stand out for you?
The number one mistake that I see people do with webinars is they don't have an offer that people want. And this is kind of where I was talking about earlier when I was trying to sell my course. We had sales coming in. We were selling it. It just wasn't, the profit numbers weren't there. And we've been working with some clients recently where this is becoming more and more apparent, where slight pivots in the offer make all the difference in the world. I'll give you an example. I was just talking to one of my clients the other day, 2 days ago, one of my consulting clients. So he does webinars for his clients. So he's kind of like a mini marketing agency.
Right.
So he's been working with his client on developing an automated sales webinar. So they created this offer. They were running all sorts of different tests and people just weren't buying. And so they were calling their attendees and the people who didn't buy and asking them the simple question, why weren't you buying? And he found that the people just felt like they didn't have the time to go through the course. And it was the way that they were positioning their offer. They didn't change anything else in the webinar. All they did was they changed how the offer was presented. And they were initially pitching it as like a 6 or an 8-week program. And now they pitched it as like an instant access program. And as soon as they did that, they started becoming profitable. I mean, when I say becoming profitable, I mean, they were going from making 0 sales to now they're not only making sales, but they were making money, which was a huge shift for them. So the biggest thing that I see is people don't focus on creating an offer. They just create an offer and they think that everybody's going to want to buy it. And they have to really understand what it is that their customer truly wants. And you could have the greatest offer in the world, but if it's not positioned properly to how your audience wants to consume it and how they want to implement it, you're going to run into some issues. We've seen just very, very slight pivots that help make all the difference in the world for an offer.
And so testing obviously plays a big role in that, right? And what's the approach or kind of the best practice? Because even if we shift the conversation away from webinars for a moment, in marketing in general, right? I mean, the importance of validating assumptions and testing things is so critical, yet very often we see people not doing that. What's just your perspective on the importance of testing and validating offers or messaging?
Oh man, it's everything. It's everything. I mean, on the podcast, we talked to a bunch of podcast guests who made just very, very simple pivots in the title of their webinar, and it would drastically improve their ROI. And so testing is everything. I'd say probably the biggest things that you want to test are, number one, you want to test the different types of offers that you're making. And number two, you want to test how people are coming into your webinar. I'll give you an example. I was running a webinar last year for our program, our webinar course, and we were trying to sell to experts, entrepreneurs who wanted to write their own webinar.
Right. And
we were getting a really high cost per registration, cost per lead, and the engagement just wasn't there and we weren't making any money. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm the webinar guy. Why can't I figure this out? So we ran one test and with our ads, and instead of saying, hey, let me show you how you can write your own webinar, which was essentially we were trying to sell a tool. we're trying to teach them how to create a webinar. That angle is very, very difficult. There's a lot of resistance with it, which we know now after we've done the testing. And we tested 1 week of saying, hey, if you'd like to learn how to get paid to write webinars for other people, sign up for this webinar. And when we changed it to be more of a, let me show you how to write webinars for other people, it became a business opportunity and there was a lot more interest. That was very telling for us with our approach for how we needed to go about in selling our program. And it was very eye-opening. So there was 2 clearly different offers that the market wanted to buy. And the approach that we were taking with the first audience, which was the experts learning how to write it themselves, they didn't really want to sit through a webinar to learn how to write their own webinar. It was counterintuitive. I mean, we wanted to be transparent and say, hey, we sell all of our services using webinars because we teach webinars, but like we're in the process of actually writing a video sales letter for it, because what we're really doing is we're selling a tool, and selling tools versus selling education or models is completely different in the approach. And so understanding that about your market and understanding about what you're really offering is so critical for the medium in which you present your offer and present the solution for your audience to buy.
Yeah. And the other big thing I think about what you just said there, Joel, is the importance of not giving up, right? So some people might have been in that situation and said, okay, well, we're putting this out there. Our cost per lead or registration or whatever is too high. Something's not working here. Like, clearly this is not going to take off. And they jump to something completely different. Instead, what I'm hearing you say is you thought about it and said, well, what else can we do here? What other market can we maybe transition or shift this for and test it out? And ultimately, you're just committed to making it a success. And I see this day in, day out with consultants and others who are looking to build businesses, where when they encounter some resistance, some people will try and take steps back and sometimes run away. Others will just understand that's part of the process, right? It's a learning experience and you're getting closer to actually finding out what is going to work by testing stuff. So I think you just shared a really good example of that.
Yeah, 100%. You know, you're likely a lot closer than you think to really knocking out of the park, especially when it comes to your campaigns and your marketing funnels. My primary audience, I mean, I work with a lot of solopreneurs who they're kind of one-man shows or one-woman shows. They run their marketing, they run their sales, and they're looking for a way to become more leveraged and to scale their business. And they have to stick with it. Sometimes it can be very frustrating. Webinars can be a daunting task. It can be a lot to handle. And I've seen a lot of people just give up. I shouldn't say rightfully so, but I completely understand why. But you definitely got to stick with it. There's no 2 ways about it.
Let's talk about the leverage part, which you just mentioned, because most consultants want to create more leverage, freedom, and time. How have you approached doing that in your own business?
Well, right now, what we're doing is we're kind of widening our net right now. And we learned a really interesting lesson with that, trying to sell our webinar course to a cold audience. And we had a lot of great things that we were offering, and like we made that offer irresistible. And I even hired other people to look at our webinar because I was that committed to it. I'm like, okay, I'm too close to it. Can somebody else take a look at this, right? And ultimately what I realized was the difference of selling the tool versus selling a model or training. And like my audience, they already knew about webinars. They wanted that next quick win. And we had software that we were including inside of our training that they could use to help build their webinar. And so that was better sold through just like a video, a quick software demo, and changing the pricing model entirely. So we went from selling a $1,000 course to now we're selling it as just a lower ticket continuity product for $97. And so the way that we're getting leverage that way is we're just turning it into a quick video sales letter, demoing the software, demoing the benefits, and throwing some other things in too. So that's how we're getting leverage. Now, we've used webinars to create leverage for our high ticket programs in the past and generating high qualified leads. And those were automated webinars, too. But there's a lot of ways to get leverage through webinars.
Right. So one of them that you just mentioned there, to clarify and confirm. So what you've really done is you've taken your consulting services, right, service offerings, and you've productized them to create this tool or the service that people will now pay for on an ongoing recurring basis.
100%.
And what about your team, right? So you could have stayed like Joel Erway, the solo independent webinar consultant, but instead you've built a small team around you Why did you do that? What was going on in your mind when you decided to take that step and actually build out a bit of a team?
Well, for number one, the team that we've got right now is still very, very small. So it consists of, I've got a couple of copywriters that work for me on a part-time basis. One handles all of our webinars, and another one helps with content for our own marketing purposes. I've got my podcast producer, these are all part-time contractors. Mm-hmm. And I've got a project manager, an assistant, and my wife who helps with the back end and the financials and stuff like that. So for a long time, I did do it myself. It was way too much work. Especially when you bootstrap, you have to do everything. But I needed to get some leverage, especially with writing the webinars. That was like the first thing that I tried to hire out. And it wasn't that I was trying to sub it out and just like hand it off to somebody. It was, I'm not a writer by nature. It takes me so long to sit down and create a script. I can create the ideas and the hooks and the flow, but I needed somebody to actually like get the grunt work done. Somebody who understood the concepts and could take it from like 50% of the way there to 100% and was somebody that I could trust to complete it. So starting to build that team helped me create that leverage so I could focus more on growing the business, honestly. And that's what needed to happen. I'm more of a visionary, wanting to launch new products and test my webinar offers and the whole 9 yards. And I needed a team to help support that.
Terrific. Joel, I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing a bit of your story here with us today. What's the best way for people to learn more about your work and to connect with you?
They can go to thewebinaragency.com and we just redid our website. So we've got a blog, we've got a podcast up there. The podcast is called Sold with Webinars. So they can go to thewebinaragency.com/podcast and you can listen to our webinar podcast and subscribe to that. And we also have a new podcast that came out earlier this year called Experts Unleashed, which focuses on people who are in the information space, coaches and consultants, selling their information for expertise. And so I interview all sorts of different experts. And the whole goal there is to teach the listeners how to spot, create, and seize opportunities to grow your solo business, your expert-based business.
Awesome. So we'll have all that in the show notes, everyone. Just head to consultingsuccess.com, type in Joel Erway or even Joel and webinars, and you'll find it. Scroll down to the bottom of the transcript, which will be there. We'll have all the show notes, all the links there for you. Joel, thanks again so much for coming on.
Michael, I had a blast. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.